The crack of a gunshot echoed through the still morning air as Florence Caldwell stumbled backward, clutching the letter to her chest like a shield. Her father's words stung far worse than any bullet could have, as he stood on the porch of their family home in Spokane, Washington, his shotgun aimed skyward. "You have until sundown to collect your things and leave this house," Harrison Caldwell bellowed, his face flushed crimson beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "No daughter of mine carries a bastard child. You've brought shame to this family for the last time." It was 1878, and at 20 years old, Florence had committed the unforgivable sin in the eyes of Spokane society. Pregnant, unmarried, and now homeless, she watched as her mother wept silently behind her father, making no move to defend her only daughter. "Papa, please," Florence pleaded, her honey-brown hair falling from its pins as she approached the steps. "The father, I don't want to hear his name," Harrison roared. "The coward fled town the moment you told him, didn't he? That Eastern banker's son playing cowboy for a summer. I warned you about him." Florence's hands instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. She was only 8 weeks along, but the morning sickness had given her away. When she'd confessed her condition to Edwin, her sweetheart of 3 months, he departed on the next train east, leaving only a hastily scribbled note about family obligations. "At least let me explain," she tried again, tears streaming down her face. Her father lowered the shotgun but kept his gaze hard. "There's nothing to explain. You made your choice." He turned his back on her and placed a protective arm around his wife's shoulders. "Sundown, Florence, not a minute more." The door slammed with such force that the porch swing rocked in its wake. Florence stood frozen, the letter from Edwin crumpled in her trembling hand, as the reality of her situation crashed over her like an icy wave. 2 hours later, Florence had packed what little she could carry: a carpet bag with a few dresses, her mother's hand-me-down quilt, a small wooden box containing her grandmother's cameo brooch, and $37 she'd saved from teaching at the schoolhouse. A position she would surely lose once news of her condition spread through town. As she slipped out the back door, avoiding another confrontation with her father, she spotted her mother waiting by the garden gate, a small bundle in her arms. "I cannot stand against your father," her mother whispered, eyes darting nervously toward the house. "But I cannot let my grandchild go hungry either." She pressed the bundle into Florence's hands: bread, cheese, dried apples, and a small jar of preserves. "Mama," Florence began, but her mother silenced her with a tight embrace. "The widow Jenkins at the boarding house might take you in temporarily," she murmured against Florence's hair. "Tell her I sent you, and when the baby comes—" Her voice broke. "Write to me. Your father need not know." With one final squeeze of her daughter's hand, Ellen Caldwell hurried back to the house, leaving Florence alone at the crossroads of her life. The widow Jenkins did not take her in. News traveled fast in Spokane, and by mid-afternoon, Florence had been turned away from 3 boarding houses, each proprietor more scandalized than the last. By dusk, she found herself sitting on her carpetbag outside the town's only hotel, weighing her dwindling options. The stagecoach to Coeur d'Alene wouldn't leave until morning, and she couldn't bear the thought of facing another night in Spokane, where whispers followed her like shadows. The livery stable seemed her only option. Perhaps she could sleep in an empty stall, just until dawn. "Miss Caldwell." Florence startled at the deep voice, quickly wiping away her tears as she looked up. Quincy Garrison stood before her, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. At 26, he was known throughout the territory as one of the most successful ranchers in the region. His spread, the Broken Arrow, lay 10 miles outside of town, and though Florence had seen him at church socials and town meetings, They'd never exchanged more than polite greetings. "Mr. Garrison," she acknowledged, attempting to compose herself. "I'm afraid you've caught me at a disadvantage." His eyes, a startling shade of blue against his sun-weathered skin, showed no judgment as they swept over her tear-stained face and the carpetbag at her feet. "I heard about your predicament," he said carefully. "Word travels fast in these parts." Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I see. Well, I'm sure you have business to attend to, Mr. Garrison. Don't let me keep you." Instead of moving on, Quincy removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair in need of a trim. "Actually, Miss Caldwell, I came looking for you. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, is returning to her sister's in Oregon next week. I find myself in need of someone to keep house at the Broken Arrow." Florence blinked, confusion momentarily overriding her despair. "You're offering me employment, room, board, and fair wages," he confirmed, replacing his hat. "The ranch is busy this time of year, and I haven't the time to manage the household affairs. But surely you've heard." Florence couldn't bring herself to say it. Quincy's expression remained impassive. "I judge folks by their character, Miss Caldwell, not by their misfortunes. You were a fine teacher to my niece before she moved back east with my sister. That speaks more to your worth than any gossip." Florence searched his face for signs of ulterior motives but found only straightforward sincerity. Still, caution prevailed. "And when my condition becomes apparent." "What then, Mr. Garrison?" Something flickered in his eyes, compassion, perhaps, or something deeper she couldn't name. "Then you'll still have a roof over your head and food on your table, and after the baby comes, you'll have help raising it if you've a mind to stay on. Why would you do this?" Florence asked, suspicion threading through her gratitude. Quincy glanced away, his jaw tightening briefly before he answered. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged unfairly. My wagon's at the livery. I'll wait while you decide, but we should leave soon if we're to reach the ranch before full dark." Florence didn't need long to deliberate. With few options and night approaching, she gathered her meager belongings and followed Quincy Garrison to his wagon, aware that she was placing her future and her unborn child's in the hands of a man she barely knew. The journey to the Broken Arrow Ranch passed mostly in silence, save for the rhythmic clop of hooves and the occasional creak of wagon wheels. Florence watched the town recede behind them, a strange mixture of relief and trepidation washing over her. Beside her, Quincy handled the reins with capable hands, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "Mrs. Abernathy will show you your duties before she leaves," he said eventually, breaking the quiet. "It's nothing too strenuous: cooking, cleaning, mending. The ranch hands take their meals in the bunkhouse, so you'll only be cooking for the main house." Florence nodded, grateful for the practical conversation. "And who resides in the main house, Mr. Garrison?" "Just me," he replied, then added after a pause, "and now you." The implication of being alone with an unmarried man was not lost on Florence, but given her current situation, propriety seemed a luxury she could no longer afford. "People will talk," she said softly. Quincy's shoulders lifted in a slight shrug. "People always talk. Doesn't mean we have to listen." As they crested a rise, the Broken Arrow came into view. Even in the fading light, Florence could make out the sprawling main house, a two-story structure of solid timber with a wide, wraparound porch. A large barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings and corrals. In the distance, cattle dotted the rolling pastures, and the jagged peaks of mountains formed a protective barrier against the horizon. "It's beautiful," Florence breathed, momentarily forgetting her troubles. A hint of pride colored Quincy's voice as he guided the horses down the slope. "Started with nothing but 50 acres and a dozen head of cattle 8 years ago. Now we're up to 3,000 acres and 800 head. You've accomplished a great deal in a short time, Mr. Garrison. Quincy, he corrected. If we're to share a roof, we might as well use our Christian names. Then you must call me Florence, she replied, feeling oddly formal despite the casual request. As they pulled up to the hitching post, the front door of the house swung open, revealing a stout woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "About time you returned," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper's gone cold," and she stopped short upon noticing Florence. "I see you've brought company." "Mrs. Abernathy," Quincy said, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Florence descend. "This is Miss Florence Caldwell. She'll be taking over your position when you leave." The housekeeper's eyes widened slightly, and Florence knew instantly that the woman had heard the gossip. To her credit, Mrs. Abernathy recovered quickly, offering a curt nod. "Well, come in then. I'll show you to the spare room and heat up some supper for you both." Inside, the house was spacious and well appointed, though decidedly masculine in its furnishings: dark woods, leather chairs, and practical decor. A few feminine touches likely Mrs. Abernathy's influence softened the rooms. Embroidered cushions on the settee, lace curtains at the windows, and vases of wildflowers on the sideboard. Florence's room, located at the back of the house with a view of the kitchen garden, was simple but comfortable. A single bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a rocking chair by the window constituted the furnishings. "It's not much," Mrs. Abernathy said, lighting the oil lamp, "but it's clean and warm. Bathrooms down the hall. Mr. Garrison had indoor plumbing put in last year." "It's more than I expected," Florence said sincerely, placing her carpetbag on the bed. "Thank you." Mrs. Abernathy lingered at the door, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Garrison explained your situation. I won't pretend to approve of how you came to be in this state, but I don't hold with turning out a young woman in your condition either." She straightened her apron. "I'll teach you what you need to know before I leave. Mr. Garrison runs a respectable household, and I expect you to maintain it as such." "Of course," Florence agreed, relief flooding through her at the woman's grudging acceptance. "Good. Now wash up and come to the kitchen. You look like you haven't eaten properly in days." Over a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and cornbread, Florence observed the dynamic between Quincy and Mrs. Abernathy. Though she addressed him formally, there was an ease in their interactions that spoke of long acquaintance and mutual respect. "The north pasture fence needs mending," Mrs. Abernathy informed Quincy as she refilled his coffee cup. "And Miller says one of the new colts is showing signs of colic." Quincy nodded, taking in the information with the practiced air of a man accustomed to juggling countless responsibilities. "I'll see to the colt tonight. The fence can wait until morning." He turned to Florence. "We rise early here, breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Sundays we attend church in town, though you're not obligated if you'd prefer not to." The thought of facing the townspeople again made Florence's stomach clench, but she appreciated being given the choice. "I'll keep to your schedule," she assured him, then hesitated before adding, "though perhaps it would be best if I avoided town for a while." Understanding flickered in Quincy's eyes. "As you wish. Mrs. Abernathy usually does the shopping, but I can handle it after she leaves if you'd prefer to remain at the ranch." Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat meaningfully. "Speaking of which, I've made a list of supplies we'll need before I depart, and Miss Caldwell will need proper attire for ranch life. Those city dresses won't hold up to the work." Florence felt a flush creep up her neck. "I'm afraid my funds are limited." "Put it on the ranch account," Quincy said without hesitation. "Consider it part of your wages. Before Florence could protest, he rose from the table. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on that colt. Mrs. Abernathy, make sure Miss Caldwell has everything she needs." After he left, Florence helped clear the table, acutely aware of Mrs. Abernathy's appraising gaze. "He's a good man," the housekeeper said abruptly. "Better than most. Lost his parents young, raised his sister alone, built this place from nothing." Florence sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. "He's been very kind to me." "Yes, well, don't mistake kindness for something else," Mrs. Abernathy warned, though her tone held more concern than admonition. "Mr. Garrison has his reasons for helping you, and they're honorable ones. See that you don't complicate matters. I assure you, I have no intention of, girl, I've been around long enough to know that intentions have little to do with how things unfold." Mrs. Abernathy sighed, her expression softening. "Just be careful with his heart. He's had enough disappointment for one lifetime." Before Florence could ask what she meant, the housekeeper changed the subject, launching into a detailed explanation of the weekly laundry schedule. But as she fell into an exhausted sleep that night, Florence found herself wondering about the enigmatic Quincy Garrison and what sorrows he might be carrying beneath his composed exterior. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Florence settled into life at the Broken Arrow. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a demanding but thorough teacher, imparting her considerable knowledge of household management before her departure. Florence learned to cook on the large cast-iron stove, to manage the pantry inventory, to distinguish between linens that could be mended and those that needed replacing. She memorized Quincy's preferences: coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, shirts starched but not too stiff, a slice of apple pie on Sunday evenings, and the rhythms of ranch life. Each morning, she rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Quincy before he headed out to work with his men. He was unfailingly polite, their conversations confined mostly to practical matters, though Florence occasionally caught him watching her with an unreadable expression when he thought she wasn't looking. The day Mrs. Abernathy left, Quincy drove her into town himself, returning with packages of fabric, ready-made dresses with room for expansion, and sturdy boots better suited to ranch life than Florence's city shoes. "Mrs. Abernathy insisted," he explained, looking uncomfortable as Florence examined the generous offerings. "Said you'd need proper clothes for your condition." "It's too much," Florence protested, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Consider it an investment in my housekeeper's comfort," Quincy replied with a small smile. "Can't have you fainting from heat in those layers of city clothes." That evening, as Florence sat on the porch mending one of Quincy's work shirts, he joined her, settling into the rocking chair with a contented sigh. "First quiet moment I've had all day," he remarked, stretching his long legs out before him. "The cattle drive starts next week." "I'll be gone for about 10 days. Florence's needle paused mid-stitch. "Oh, I see. Miguel will stay behind to look after the ranch and check on you daily," he continued. "And Dr. Parker knows to come if you need him." "I'm perfectly capable of managing on my own," Florence assured him, though the thought of being alone on the ranch sent a flicker of anxiety through her. "Besides, I'm not due for months yet." Quincy studied her face in the fading light. "It's not just the baby I'm concerned about. There are drifters sometimes, looking for work or other opportunities." The implication was clear, and Florence appreciated his candor. "I'll keep the doors locked and the shotgun loaded," she promised, only half joking. Quincy's expression remained serious. "I wouldn't leave if it wasn't necessary. The cattle need to get to market and I need to oversee the sale personally." "I understand, truly." Florence resumed her mending. "This is your livelihood. Don't worry about me." They sat in companionable silence as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and sage, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "My father worked this land before me," Quincy said suddenly, his voice low. "Not this ranch, we didn't have much back then, but this valley. He believed a man could make something of himself out here if he was willing to work hard enough." Florence set aside her mending, sensing this was a rare glimpse into the private thoughts of her taciturn employer. "He sounds like a wise man." "He was. Died when I was 17. Influenza took him and my mother both within a week of each other." Quincy's hands gripped the arms of his rocking chair. "Left me with a 14-year-old sister to raise, a mortgaged piece of land, and not much else." "I'm sorry," Florence said softly. "That must have been difficult." Quincy shrugged. "We managed, sold the land, moved into town. I took whatever work I could find, livery, blacksmith's helper, even dealt cards for a while." His mouth twisted into a wry smile. "Not my proudest moment, but it put food on the table." "And your sister, Sarah, she's in St. Louis now, married a banker last year." Pride warmed his voice. "Got her through school, made sure she had the chances our parents would have wanted for her." Florence found herself touched by his devotion to his sister. "And then you built all this," she said, gesturing to the expansive ranch around them. "Took some luck and a lot of long days," he acknowledged. "But yes, I built this." He paused, his expression turning distant. "Almost married once, about 3 years ago. Rebecca Thornton, Judge's daughter from over in Walla Walla. Seemed to like ranch life well enough during courtship, but when it came time to set the date." He trailed off. "She changed her mind," Florence ventured gently. "Said she couldn't imagine spending her life in the middle of nowhere with nothing but cows and cowboys for company," Quincy quoted, the old hurt evident in his tone. "Last I heard, she'd married a lawyer in Seattle." Florence felt an unexpected surge of indignation on his behalf. "Then she was a fool," she said firmly. "This is a beautiful place, and what you've built here is remarkable." Quincy looked startled at her vehemence, then pleased. "Thank you, Florence." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it, soft, almost reverent, sent a strange flutter through her chest. To cover her confusion, she returned to her mending with renewed focus. "And what about you?" he asked after a moment. "If it's not too forward to ask, the father of your child." Florence's fingers tightened around the needle. "Edwin Harrington. His father owns a bank in Boston. Edwin was out here for the summer, supposedly learning about Western investments." She laughed without humor. "Turns out I was just part of his Western adventure. He left when you told him about the baby, the very next day. Left a note saying he was engaged to someone back east, a fact he had conveniently omitted during our courtship." Florence blinked back tears of anger and humiliation. "My father warned me about him, but I was too enamored with his fancy manners and grand promises to listen." Quincy's expression darkened. "A man who abandons his responsibilities isn't much of a man at all." "No," Florence agreed softly. "I see that now." Another comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the gentle creak of Quincy's rocking chair. As darkness settled fully over the ranch, Florence gathered her mending and rose to her feet. "I should prepare for tomorrow," she said. "What time will you want breakfast before the drive?" "4," Quincy replied, standing as well. "But don't trouble yourself, I can manage coffee and biscuits." "Nonsense. You'll need a proper meal before such a journey." Florence moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to face him. "Thank you, Quincy, not just for the employment, but for treating me like a person worth respecting. It means more than I can say." In the dim porch light, she could see his expression soften. You are worth respecting, Florence. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially yourself." With that gentle admonition lingering in her mind, Florence bid him good night and retreated to her room, where she lay awake long into the night, pondering the curious path that had led her to the broken arrow, and the equally curious feelings beginning to stir in her heart for the honorable rancher who had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most. The morning of the cattle drive dawned cool and clear. True to her word, Florence rose at 3 to prepare a hearty breakfast for Quincy and his men: eggs, bacon, flapjacks, and biscuits with gravy. The ranch hands ate at the long table in the bunkhouse, while Quincy took his meal in the main house kitchen with Florence. "This is a feast fit for a king," he commented, pouring maple syrup over his flapjacks. "The men will be singing your praises all the way to Montana." Florence smiled, pleased by the compliment. "Just make sure they come back safe. All of you," she added, trying to sound casual despite the concern that had kept her tossing and turning all night. Quincy glanced up, seeming to read something in her expression. "We've made this drive a dozen times. It's straightforward enough, just long and dusty. Even so, be careful. The ranch would be a lonely place without its master." Florence busied herself at the stove, avoiding his gaze. "Florence." Something in his tone made her turn. Quincy had risen from the table and now stood just a few feet away, his hat in his hands. "I'll come back, I promise." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. In just 3 weeks, she had grown accustomed to his presence, his quiet strength, his considerate nature, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face. The thought of 10 days without him left her feeling strangely bereft. "While I'm gone," he continued, "feel free to use the library. There are books there that might interest you, and if you need anything from town, Miguel can fetch it or take you in the wagon." "Thank you. I'll be fine, truly." Florence managed a smile. "Just focus on getting a good price for your cattle." Quincy hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, but a shout from outside announced that the men were ready. With a nod, he placed his hat on his head and moved toward the door. "Quincy," Florence called after him. When he turned, she surprised herself by crossing to him and straightening his bandana. "There. Now you look proper." Her hands lingered a moment too long on the fabric before she stepped back, flustered by her own boldness. A slow smile spread across his face. "I'll be home before you know it." As the dust from the departing herd settled, Florence found herself standing on the porch long after Quincy and his men had disappeared from sight. The ranch seemed suddenly vast and empty, despite Miguel's presence in the bunkhouse and the usual chorus of animal sounds from the barn and coops. The first few days passed in a routine of chores and small projects. Florence took advantage of Quincy's absence to give the main house a thorough cleaning, from the rafters to the floorboards. She discovered his library was indeed substantial, with volumes ranging from practical farming manuals to poetry and novels. One shelf held a collection of leather-bound journals, and though curiosity tempted her, Florence respected Quincy's privacy too much to peek inside. Instead, she selected a well-worn copy of Jane Eyre and spent her evenings reading by lamplight. On the 4th day, Florence woke feeling unusually tired and nauseated. The morning sickness that had plagued her earlier in her pregnancy had subsided weeks ago, but now it returned with vengeance. By mid-morning, she found herself kneeling beside a bucket in the kitchen, trembling and weak. "Señorita Florence," Miguel's concerned voice came from the doorway. The middle-aged ranch hand had been checking on her daily as promised, usually bringing fresh eggs or vegetables from the kitchen garden. "I'm fine," she assured him, though the pallor of her face surely belied her words. "Just a touch of morning sickness." Miguel frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Perhaps I should fetch Dr. Parker." "No, really, it's not necessary. This is normal for women in my condition." Florence attempted to stand but swayed alarmingly. Miguel moved quickly to support her, guiding her to a chair. "With respect, Señorita, you do not look normal. You look ill." "Mr. Garrison would want me to fetch the doctor." Too weak to argue further, Florence conceded. "Very well, but please tell him it's not urgent. I'm sure I just need rest." While Miguel rode for town, Florence managed to drag herself to the settee in the parlor, where she collapsed into an exhausted slumber. She woke to the gentle touch of Dr. Parker's hand on her forehead. "Miss Caldwell, can you hear me?" Florence blinked groggily, disoriented by the transition from sleep to wakefulness. "Dr. Parker, what time is it?" "Nearly 4 o'clock. You've been asleep since Miguel left for town." The doctor, a kindly man in his 50s with spectacles perched on his nose, helped her sit up. "He was quite concerned about you, and I can see why. You're running a fever." A thorough examination followed, during which Dr. Parker's expression grew increasingly grave. When he'd finished, he sat beside her on the settee, his manner gentle but direct. "Miss Caldwell, I'm concerned you may be experiencing complications with your pregnancy. The fever, combined with the returned nausea and the discomfort you describe in your lower abdomen, suggests a possible infection." Fear clutched at Florence's heart. "The baby may still be fine, doctor," Parker assured her, "but you need complete bed rest, plenty of fluids, and these powders to bring down the fever." He produced a paper packet from his bag. "I'd prefer to have you in town where I can monitor you more closely, but given your condition." He trailed off tactfully. Florence understood his meaning. Even in her illness, she would not be welcome in most Spokane establishments. "I'll stay here and follow your instructions to the letter." The doctor nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I'll return the day after tomorrow to check on you. Send Miguel for me immediately if the symptoms worsen, particularly if you experience any bleeding." After the doctor left, Miguel proved himself an unexpectedly capable nurse, bringing cool compresses for her fever and ensuring she took her medicine on schedule. By the following morning, Florence felt marginally better, though still weak and confined to bed on doctor's orders. On the 6th day of Quincy's absence, as Florence sat propped up in bed attempting to read, the distant sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Peering out the window, she was startled to see Quincy himself galloping toward the house, alone and 2 days ahead of schedule. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, tossing the reins to a surprised Miguel before taking the porch steps 2 at a time. Florence heard the front door slam, followed by rapid footsteps through the house. "Florence!" His voice carried a note of barely contained panic. "In here," she called, hastily adjusting her wrapper and smoothing her hair. Quincy appeared in her doorway, dusty and travel-worn, his eyes wild with concern. "Miguel's telegram said you were ill. The doctor was called." Florence felt a rush of warmth that he had cut his journey short on her account. "It's nothing serious," she assured him, though Dr. Parker's diagnosis suggested otherwise. "Just a fever and some discomfort. Dr. Parker says with rest I should recover fully." Quincy entered the room, removing his hat as he approached the bed. His gaze swept over her pale face, lingering on the untouched tea and toast on the bedside table. "You're not eating." "I haven't much appetite," she admitted, "but truly I'm better today than yesterday." He frowned, unconvinced. "What did Parker say exactly?" Florence hesitated, reluctant to worry him further. "He mentioned a possible infection." "He's coming back tomorrow to check on me again." Quincy's jaw tightened. "And the baby? He believes all will be well if I follow his instructions." Florence managed a weak smile. "Which I have been, I promise." Miguel has been most attentive. Some of the tension eased from Quincy's shoulders. Good, that's good. He glanced around the room, seeming suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation, he in her bedroom, she in her nightclothes. I should let you rest. Is there anything you need? You didn't have to come back early, Florence said, avoiding his question. What about the cattle? Peterson can handle the sale. The herd was in good shape when I left. Quincy shifted uncomfortably. When I got Miguel's telegram saying you were ill, I couldn't stay away. The simple admission sent a flutter through Florence's chest that had nothing to do with her fever. Thank you, she whispered. Quincy cleared his throat. I'll have Leela from town come out to help until you're on your feet again. She's a good woman, worked as a midwife before she married Tom Fletcher. That's not necessary. It is, Quincy interrupted firmly. You need proper care, and Miguel, for all his good intentions, is no nurse. Too tired to argue, Florence nodded. As you wish. Rest now, Quincy said, his voice softening. I'll be nearby if you need anything. As he turned to leave, Florence called after him. Quincy, he paused in the doorway. I'm glad you're home. A smile touched his lips. So am I, Florence, so am I. Leela Fletcher arrived the next morning, a cheerful, robust woman in her 40s with capable hands and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded Florence of Mrs. Abernathy. Under her care, Florence's condition improved steadily. The fever broke on the second day, and by the end of the week, Dr. Parker declared her out of immediate danger, though he insisted she continue to rest for at least another fortnight. The baby seems to be developing normally, he assured both Florence and Quincy, who had insisted on being present for the examination. But this episode serves as a warning. Miss Caldwell needs to avoid strain or stress for the remainder of her pregnancy. Quincy nodded gravely. She'll have all the help she needs. When Dr. Parker had gone, Quincy lingered in Florence's room, now made more proper by Leela's presence arranging flowers on the dresser. I've been thinking, he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. Perhaps we should consider bringing your mother to visit. Having family nearby might speed your recovery. Florence's heart clenched at the mention of her family. My mother made her choice when she stood by while my father cast me out. Besides, she couldn't come without his knowledge, and he's made his feelings about my disgrace quite clear. Quincy's expression hardened. A man should stand by his daughter, no matter what. Not all men are as honorable as you, Florence said softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or a deeper connection neither was ready to name. The moment stretched, charged with possibilities, until Leela's tactful cough broke the spell. Mr. Garrison, if you don't mind, Miss Caldwell needs her rest, she said, though her knowing smile suggested she understood exactly what she had interrupted. Quincy straightened, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. Of course. I'll be in the study if you need me. As autumn descended on the Broken Arrow, painting the surrounding hills in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Florence regained her strength and resumed light duties around the house. Leela had returned to town, though she still visited twice weekly to help with heavier tasks and to check on Florence's progress. By mid-October, Florence's condition had become unmistakable. Her dresses, even those Quincy had purchased with foresight, had to be let out to accommodate her growing belly. Each movement of the child within her brought both joy and a bittersweet reminder of how alone she truly was. No mother to guide her through this first pregnancy. No husband to share in the miracle of creation. Except she wasn't truly alone. She realized one crisp morning as she stood on the porch watching Quincy work with a young colt in the corral. He had become her constant, her support, her friend. When nightmares plagued her sleep, He was there with a cup of chamomile tea and quiet reassurance. When her back ached from the weight of her child, he fashioned a special cushion for her rocking chair. When melancholy overtook her, he drew her out with stories of his cattle drives or read aloud from her favorite books in the evening. And somewhere along the way, without her noticing the precise moment it happened, Florence had fallen in love with him. The realization should have terrified her. After Edwin's betrayal and her father's rejection, trusting her heart to another man seemed foolish at best, reckless at worst. Yet with Quincy, fear found no purchase. His integrity, his kindness, his unwavering support all had conspired to break down the walls she'd built around her wounded heart. But did he feel the same? Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch, but he never spoke of feelings beyond friendship and concern for her welfare. Perhaps he saw her only as a responsibility, a good deed, a woman in need of protection rather than a partner to be desired. Lost in these thoughts, she didn't notice Quincy approaching until he was climbing the porch steps, removing his gloves. "You've been standing out here for nearly an hour," he observed, his voice tinged with concern. "It's getting cold. You should come inside." Florence smiled at his protectiveness. "I was enjoying the view. The mountains look magnificent with the first dusting of snow." Quincy followed her gaze to the distant peaks, now white-capped against the blue sky. "Winter comes early up here. We should prepare for the first real snowfall soon." "I've never experienced a Montana winter," Florence admitted. "Is it very harsh?" "It can be. The snow gets deep, and sometimes we're cut off from town for days at a stretch." Quincy studied her face. "Does that worry you?" Florence considered the question. 6 months ago, the thought of being isolated on a remote ranch through winter would have terrified her. Now, it seemed almost appealing, a cocoon of peace before the baby's arrival in late January. "No," she said honestly. "I feel safe here." Something flickered in Quincy's eyes, pleasure perhaps, or relief. "Good, that's good." An awkward silence fell between them, laden with unspoken thoughts. Florence shifted, wincing slightly as the baby delivered a particularly enthusiastic kick. Quincy noticed immediately. "Are you in pain?" "No, just active," Florence laughed, placing a hand on her rounded belly. "This little one seems to be practicing for a cattle drive of their own." Without thinking, she reached for Quincy's hand and placed it where the baby was moving. His eyes widened at the sensation of the child kicking against his palm. "That's amazing," he murmured, his expression one of awe. Florence watched his face, captivated by the wonder she saw there. "It is, isn't it? A little miracle." Quincy's gaze lifted to meet hers, and for a breathless moment, Florence thought he might say something, might finally put words to the feelings that seemed to hover just beneath the surface of their every interaction. Instead, he gently withdrew his hand. "I should finish with that colt before supper," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Leela left a stew simmering. It should be ready by 6. Florence nodded, hiding her disappointment behind a practiced smile. "I'll see to it." As Quincy returned to the corral, Florence retreated to the kitchen, busying herself with preparations for the evening meal. She was rolling out dough for biscuits when a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and grip the edge of the table for support. "Just Braxton Hicks contractions," she murmured to herself, recalling Leela's explanation of the false labor pains that sometimes occurred in the later months of pregnancy. Nothing to worry about. But when a second, stronger pain followed minutes later, Florence felt the first stirrings of real concern. It was too soon, far too soon, for true labor to begin. The baby wasn't due for more than 2 months. She lowered herself carefully into a chair, breathing deeply as Leela had shown her. The pain subsided, leaving her shaken but relieved. Perhaps it was nothing after all. She had been on her feet much of the day, and Dr. Parker had warned her about overexertion. Yet as she moved to rise, a warm wetness trickled down her legs, followed by a gush that left a puddle on the kitchen floor. Florence stared in horror at the pinkish fluid, understanding with terrible clarity what was happening. "Quincy," she called, her voice thin with fear. When no answer came, she tried again, louder this time. "Quincy!" She heard the thud of boots on the porch, then the door flying open as Quincy rushed in, alerted by the panic in her voice. "Florence!" What he stopped short, taking in the scene before him, Florence pale and trembling, the puddle on the floor, the hand clutching her belly. "The baby," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "It's coming too soon." In an instant, Quincy was beside her, scooping her into his arms with surprising gentleness. "I'm taking you to your room, then I'll ride for Dr. Parker." "There's no time," Florence gasped as another contraction seized her. "The baby won't wait." Quincy's face went ashen, but his voice remained steady. "Then I'll send one of the men for the doctor and Leela. I won't leave you." He carried her to her bedroom, laying her carefully on the bed before rushing to the door and bellowing for Miguel. Instructions were given, a horse saddled, and within minutes, the sound of galloping hooves announced Miguel's desperate race toward town. Returning to Florence's side, Quincy looked utterly out of his depth, a man accustomed to handling any crisis now faced with one beyond his experience. "What do you need?" he asked, taking her hand. "Tell me how to help you." Florence squeezed his fingers as another contraction gripped her. "Clean linens," she managed between panting breaths. "Hot water and someone who knows what they're doing." "Leela will be here soon," Quincy promised, though they both knew soon might not be soon enough. As the contractions increased in frequency and intensity, Florence oscillated between terror for her baby and an odd, detached calm. Quincy moved with quiet efficiency, following her instructions and offering what comfort he could. He bathed her forehead with cool cloths, held her hand through the worst of the pains, and spoke soft reassurances when fear threatened to overwhelm her. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her during a brief respite between contractions. "And this baby is part of you. They'll be strong too." Florence managed a weak smile. "If strength were all that mattered, I wouldn't be afraid, but baby's born this early." She couldn't finish the thought. Quincy leaned closer, his eyes fierce with determination. "Listen to me, Florence. I don't know much about birthing babies, but I do know about fighting against the odds. This child has you for a mother, a woman who faced scandal and rejection rather than deny their existence. That's a powerful beginning." His words gave her courage, and when the next contraction came, Florence bore down with renewed resolve. Hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Outside, darkness fell, and still there was no sign of Dr. Parker or Leela. I think it's time," Florence gasped eventually, feeling an overwhelming urge to push. "The baby is coming now." Quincy's face paled, but he nodded resolutely. "Tell me what to do." With the last of her strength, Florence guided him through the basics she had gleaned from conversations with Leela. And then, with a final, excruciating effort, her child entered the world tiny, blue-tinged, and frighteningly silent. "A boy," Quincy announced, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the infant in a clean towel. "You have a son, Florence." But the baby wasn't crying. Florence struggled to sit up, panic clawing at her throat. "Why isn't he crying?" "Quincy, he needs to cry." Acting on instinct, Quincy gently rubbed the baby's back, then, when that failed to elicit a response, turned him over and patted between his shoulder blades. For one heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the tiny infant gave a weak, mewling cry that grew stronger with each breath. "There he is," Quincy whispered, relief evident in every line of his face as he placed the now pink baby on Florence's chest. "There's your fighter." Florence wept as she cradled her son, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. He was impossibly small, his tiny fingers no bigger than matchsticks, his face wrinkled and red. But he was alive, and in that moment nothing else mattered. "He's perfect," she murmured, counting his fingers and toes, marveling at the delicate shell of his ears, the surprising strength of his grip when she offered her finger. Quincy sat beside them on the edge of the bed, his expression a mix of awe and tenderness. "He is, just like his mother." Their eyes met over the baby's head, and in Quincy's gaze, Florence saw something that made her heart skip, not just admiration or friendly affection, but a depth of feeling that matched her own unspoken love. Before either could find words for the moment, the sound of approaching horses broke the spell. Minutes later, Dr. Parker rushed into the room, followed closely by a breathless Leela. "You've had the baby," Dr. Parker observed unnecessarily, setting down his bag. "When did the delivery occur?" "Just now," Quincy replied, reluctantly moving aside to give the doctor access to Florence and the infant. "The boy seems healthy, but he's small." Dr. Parker's examination was thorough but gentle. "He is indeed premature, I'd estimate by about 6 weeks. But his color is good, and his lungs seem to be functioning well, which is the most critical concern." He glanced at Florence. "You did remarkably well under the circumstances, Miss Caldwell." "I had help," Florence said softly, her gaze finding Quincy's across the room, as Dr. Parker continued his assessment. Leela took charge of cleaning up and ensuring Florence was comfortable. She shooed Quincy from the room with firm instructions to get some rest himself. "You've done your part, Mr. Garrison," she told him. "Now let us women handle things for a while." Quincy hesitated, looking to Florence for guidance. She gave him a tired smile. "Go. We'll be fine now." With a reluctant nod, he left, closing the door quietly behind him. In the days that followed, Florence and her son, whom she named William Henry Caldwell, remained under the watchful care of Dr. Parker and Leela. The baby, though small, proved resilient, taking to nursing with determination and growing stronger each day. Quincy kept a respectful distance, visiting briefly each morning and evening to inquire after their health. Florence sensed he was giving her space, perhaps unsure of his place in this new dynamic. She missed their easy companionship, but was too consumed with learning to care for her fragile son to bridge the growing gap between them. A week after William's birth, as Florence sat in the rocking chair by the window nursing her son, a knock came at her bedroom door. Adjusting her shawl to ensure modesty, she called, "Come in." Quincy entered, carrying a small wooden cradle. "I made this," he said without preamble, setting it carefully beside her bed. "For the baby." Florence stared at the cradle, emotion welling in her throat. It was beautifully crafted, the wood sanded smooth and polished to a soft glow. Along the sides, Quincy had carved a delicate pattern of stars and moons. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touched beyond words by the gesture. "When did you find time?" "I've been working on it since you first arrived," Quincy admitted, running a hand along the curved edge. "I thought you might need it eventually. I just had to finish it a bit sooner than expected." Florence blinked back tears. "Thank you for this and for everything you've done for us." Quincy shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," Florence insisted. "You've given us a home, security, respect. You delivered my son when no one else was here. And now this." She gestured to the cradle. "Why, Quincy? Why have you done all this for me, for us?" The question hung in the air between them, demanding an answer that went beyond the polite evasions and half-truths they'd both been hiding behind. Quincy's gaze dropped to the sleeping infant in her arms, then lifted to meet her eyes with a newfound resolve. "Because from the moment I saw you sitting alone outside that hotel, I knew you were someone worth knowing," he said quietly. "Because you faced adversity with dignity and grace. Because—" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Because somewhere along the way I fell in love with you, Florence." The words, so long hoped for yet unexpected in this moment, stole her breath. William stirred against her breast, sensing perhaps his mother's sudden tension. "You love me." Florence managed finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Quincy nodded, his expression a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "I do. And I love that boy too, though he's not of my blood. I know it's too soon after his birth to speak of such things, and I'll understand if you need time or if your feelings don't match mine. But I wanted you to know that this isn't charity or mere kindness. This is home for both of you for as long as you want it to be." Florence cradled William with one arm and reached out her free hand to Quincy. When he took it, she tugged him gently closer until he knelt beside her rocking chair. "I love you too," she confessed, joy bubbling up through the exhaustion of new motherhood. "I have for some time now, though I hardly dared admit it to myself." Relief and happiness transformed Quincy's face. "Truly, truly." Florence smiled down at the baby, then back at the man before her. "William and I are a package, you know. Loving me means taking him as your own." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Quincy said firmly. "If you'll have me, I want to be a father to him in every way that matters." Florence felt tears spill over onto her cheeks, not tears of sorrow or fear as had so often been the case in recent months, but tears of pure happiness. "We would be honored." Quincy rose slightly, just enough to press a gentle kiss to her forehead, mindful of the baby between them. "I'll speak to Reverend Thompson when you're stronger. If you're willing, I'd like to make this official, make us a family in the eyes of God and the community." "I'd like that too," Florence whispered, understanding he was proposing marriage in his own practical way. As William slept peacefully in her arms and Quincy gazed at them both with undisguised love, Florence marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair on that fateful day in Spokane, to this moment of profound joy, each step, even the painful ones, had led her to where she was meant to be. The snow began to fall outside, big flakes drifting past the window and blanketing the Broken Arrow in pristine white. The first winter storm had arrived, but inside the ranch house, warmth and hope prevailed. "The three of us, then," Quincy said softly, one hand on William's tiny head, the other still clasping Florence's. "A family." "A family," Florence echoed, her heart full to bursting. "At last." 2 months later, on a clear January morning with the mountains glittering like diamonds in the distance, Florence Caldwell became Florence Garrison in a simple ceremony at the Broken Arrow. Reverend Thompson had journeyed from Spokane to officiate, bringing with him a small contingent of townspeople who had come to respect Quincy too much to shun his choice of bride. To Florence's astonishment, her mother was among them, arriving unannounced the day before the wedding with tears in her eyes and apologies on her lips. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," Ellen Caldwell confessed as she held her grandson for the first time. "But I couldn't bear to miss this day. And I needed to see this child, my grandchild." William, now thriving despite his early arrival, regarded his grandmother with solemn eyes before breaking into the gummy smile that never failed to melt Florence's heart. "He's beautiful," Ellen whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Florence, I'm so sorry. I should have stood by you." "You're here now," Florence said, choosing forgiveness over resentment. "That's what matters." The wedding itself was modest but meaningful. Florence wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Leela and several other ranch wives had helped fashion. Quincy, normally most comfortable in work clothes, cut a handsome figure in a new suit ordered from a catalog back in November. As they exchanged vows before the fireplace in the main house, William nestled contentedly in Miguel's arms, seemingly understanding the significance of the moment that was formally uniting his little family. I, Quincy James Garrison, take you, Florence Marie Caldwell, to be my lawfully wedded wife. Quincy's deep voice resonated with conviction. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When it came Florence's turn, she added her own silent promise to trust this man with her heart, to build a life worthy of his love, to raise William to embody the same integrity and kindness she so admired in his adoptive father. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Thompson declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Their first kiss as husband and wife was sweet and reverent, a seal upon promises both spoken and unspoken. Around them, their small gathering of witnesses applauded, none more enthusiastically than Miguel and Leila, who had become dear friends through the trials of recent months. The celebration that followed was warmer and more joyful than Florence could have imagined. The bunkhouse had been transformed with evergreen boughs and lanterns, a makeshift dance floor cleared in the center. The ranch hands, who had come to regard Florence with a protective fondness, had arranged for a fiddle player from town, and soon the air was filled with music and laughter. As Florence danced in her new husband's arms, William sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby under Ellen's watchful eye, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in less than a year. "Happy, Mrs. Garrison," Quincy murmured against her hair. "Completely," she assured him, lifting her face for another kiss. "And you?" His smile, so rare when they first met and now a regular sight, warmed her to her toes. "I have everything I ever wanted right here." Later that night, after the guests had departed and William had been settled in his cradle, now moved to a small adjoining room where they could hear him, if he cried, Florence and Quincy stood together at the bedroom window, watching the moon cast silver light across the snow-covered ranch. "I was thinking," Quincy said, his arms wrapped around her from behind, "that come spring, we might start on an addition to the house. William will need his own room eventually, and perhaps—" He hesitated, his breath warm against her neck. "Perhaps we might fill another room or two in time." Florence turned in his embrace, her heart swelling with love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I think that sounds wonderful. A brother or sister for William someday." "And in the meantime," Quincy continued, pressing a tender kiss to her lips, "I plan to be the best father I can be to our son." "Our son," Florence repeated, loving the sound of those words. "He's lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," Quincy insisted, "to have found you both." As they stood there in the moonlight, the promise of their future stretching before them like the vast Montana plains, Florence knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as a woman thrown out and the cowboy who took her in, but as partners, as equals, as a family forged in adversity and bound by love. Spring brought renewal to the Broken Arrow. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Calves were born, the garden was planted, and William, now 5 months old, grew stronger and more curious by the day. On a particularly fine April morning, Florence sat on a blanket spread beneath the old cottonwood tree, watching as Quincy showed William a butterfly that had landed on a nearby wildflower. The baby's delighted gurgle when the insect fluttered its wings brought a smile to her face. "He's going to be running all over this ranch before we know it," Quincy predicted, scooping the infant into his arms and returning to the blanket. Got a strong grip too. Grabbed my finger earlier and wouldn't let go. Florence laughed. Like father, like son. The words slipped out naturally, but they both paused, struck by their significance. Quincy had formally adopted William just after the wedding, giving the boy his surname and all legal rights as his heir. But this was the first time Florence had referred to them as father and son so directly. Quincy's face softened as he gazed down at the baby. "I hope so," he said quietly. "I hope he grows up with my better qualities and your strength." "He will," Florence assured him, leaning over to kiss first William's downy head, then Quincy's son's warm cheek. "He already has your determination. You should see how he struggles to roll over during his naps." A comfortable silence settled between them as they enjoyed the simple pleasure of being together as a family on this perfect spring day. William eventually dozed off in Quincy's arms, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. "I've been meaning to tell you," Quincy said after a while, his voice pitched low to avoid waking the baby. "I heard from Peterson yesterday. The Harrington Bank is foreclosing on the Wilcox place over in Idaho Territory." Florence stiffened at the familiar name. "Harrington, as in?" "Edwin's father's bank, yes." Quincy's expression was carefully neutral. "Seems they're expanding their interests in the West after all." "I see." Florence plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. Though the wound of Edwin's betrayal had healed, the mention of his name still brought a twinge of remembered hurt. Peterson also mentioned that Edwin himself is overseeing the expansion. Quincy hesitated before adding, "He's in Spokane this week, apparently." Florence absorbed this information, surprised to find it affected her less than she would have expected. "I hope his wife accompanied him on his travels this time," she said dryly. Quincy's lips twitched. "According to Peterson, she did, along with their infant daughter." "Ah." Florence nodded, understanding dawning. "So that's why he left so abruptly. He already had a family on the way." "It seems so." Quincy shifted William to his other arm. "Does it bother you, knowing he's nearby?" Florence considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, the thought of encountering Edwin would have filled her with dread and shame. Now she found herself largely indifferent. "No," she said honestly. "What he did was cruel, but if he hadn't left, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have you or this life we're building." "In a strange way, I'm grateful." Quincy's free arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You're a remarkable woman, Florence Garrison. And you're a remarkable man," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "William and I are blessed to have you." As they sat together under the cottonwood tree, with the ranch flourishing around them and their son sleeping peacefully in his father's arms, Florence felt a contentment so deep it seemed to reach into her very soul. The path that had led her here had been fraught with pain and uncertainty, but every step had been worthwhile. She had been thrown out for getting pregnant, and a cowboy had taken her in and promised to raise her baby. But what had started as an act of kindness had blossomed into something far more profound, a love that had saved them both and created a family stronger than blood. And as the afternoon sun bathed the broken arrow in golden light, Florence knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, now and always, not as a woman in need of rescue, but as a wife, a mother, a partner in all things. This was home. 5 years later, the Broken Arrow Ranch had prospered beyond even Quincy's ambitious dreams. The main house had been expanded to include not only William's room but also a nursery for his little sister, Eliza Jane, born 2 years after Florence and Quincy's wedding. A third child was now on the way, Florence's rounded belly a testament to their growing family. William, at 5, was the spitting image of his mother with his honey-brown hair and thoughtful expression, though he had inherited none of her timidity. He followed Quincy everywhere, soaking up knowledge of ranch life like a sponge, already declaring his intention to be the best rancher in all of Montana Territory when he grew up. On a warm summer evening, as Florence sat on the porch mending one of William's perpetually torn trousers, she watched her husband and son return from checking the north pasture. William rode his own pony now, a gentle mare named Sugar that Quincy had trained specifically for him. The sight of them together, Quincy pointing out something in the distance, William nodding seriously, filled her heart with joy. "Mama," William called, spotting her on the porch. He urged Sugar into a trot, eager to share his adventures. "We saw a bear cub. Papa said we had to keep our distance 'cause Mama Bear might be nearby, but it was drinking from the creek and didn't even see us." "My goodness," Florence replied, setting aside her mending as William dismounted with the agility of a child raised in the saddle. "That sounds exciting." It was. William bounded up the steps, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "Papa says I handled Sugar just right, didn't let her get spooked or nothing." "Anything," Florence corrected gently. "You didn't let her get spooked by anything." William nodded, accepting the correction. "Can I go tell Eliza about the bear? She's gonna wish she was big enough to come with us. She's napping, but you can tell her when she wakes up." Florence smoothed his wind-blown hair. "Go wash up now. Supper will be ready soon." As William dashed inside, Quincy approached at a more measured pace, leading both his horse and William's pony toward the barn. He paused at the foot of the porch steps, his face breaking into the smile that still made Florence's heart skip a beat. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her belly. "Well enough," Florence assured him. "The little one has been active today, but nothing I can't manage." Quincy nodded, satisfied. "I'll just see to the horses and be right in." As he turned toward the barn, Florence called after him, "Quincy." He looked back, eyebrows raised in question. "I love you." His expression softened, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling with genuine happiness. "And I love you, Florence, more every day." It was true. Florence reflected as she gathered her mending and went inside to check on Eliza and start supper. Their love had only deepened with time and trials, growing stronger with each challenge they faced together, each joy they shared. The scandal that had once threatened to define her had faded into insignificance, replaced by the respect she'd earned as Quincy's wife and partner, as William and Eliza's mother, as a woman of substance in her own right. Even her father had eventually come around, his initial stubbornness no match for Ellen's quiet persistence, and the undeniable charm of his grandchildren. That night, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Florence and Quincy sat together on the porch swing, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "I've been thinking," Quincy said, his arm a comfortable weight around her shoulders. "William's old enough for school now," Florence nodded. She'd been teaching him his letters and numbers at home, but formal education would eventually be necessary. "The school in town is too far for daily travel." "Exactly my thought." Quincy hesitated, then continued. "What if we built a schoolhouse here on the ranch? We could hire a teacher, open it to the children from neighboring ranches too, give them all a proper education without sending them away." Florence turned to face him, surprised and touched by the suggestion. "You do that for our children?" "Of course." Quincy's hand moved to rest on her belly where their third child grew. "And I was thinking, who better to run such a school than a former teacher? Me." Florence blinked. "It's been years since I taught." "But you've never stopped being a teacher," Quincy pointed out. "I see how you are with William and Eliza, how you make everything a lesson without them even realizing it. You have a gift, Florence." The idea took root in her mind, growing more appealing the longer she considered it. "It would be wonderful to teach again," she admitted. And to create a school where all children are welcome, regardless of circumstances. Quincy smiled, understanding her meaning. A place where no child feels judged or unwanted. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Florence leaned against him, overwhelmed with gratitude for this man who continually found new ways to support her dreams, who had given her not just a home but a purpose. Then let's do it, she decided. Let's build a school. The Broken Arrow School opened the following spring. A sturdy one-room building with large windows to catch the light and a bell tower that could be heard across the valley. Florence, her third child, a boy they named James strapped to her back, welcomed 6 students that first day. William, 2 children from the neighboring Peterson Ranch, and 3 from the settlement that had sprung up around the Broken Arrow as it expanded its operations. As she stood before these eager young faces, Florence thought back to that fateful day in Spokane when her life had seemed to end. How could she have known then that it was just beginning? That the path that appeared to lead only to shame and hardship would instead bring her to this moment of fulfillment and joy. "Welcome to our school," she said, her voice steady and clear in the morning light. "Here, we learn not just reading and arithmetic, but kindness and respect for one another. Here, everyone has value. Everyone belongs." From the doorway, Quincy watched with pride little Eliza perched on his shoulders for a better view of her mother's first day as teacher. Their eyes met across the room, and in that silent exchange was all the love and understanding that had grown between them over the years, a partnership forged in compassion, strengthened by challenge, and sustained by unwavering faith in each other. Outside, the Broken Arrow Ranch spread in all directions, a testament to what could be built from humble beginnings and determined hearts. And at its center stood this family. A woman once cast out, a man who had opened his home and his heart, and the children who thrived in the shelter of their love. It was more than Florence had ever dared to dream of, and it was just the beginning.